was going to get a stool. I was going to feel better with the stool. But like anybody cares, right?
Well, we used to have one in here all the time. But we used to
I take them back and forth.
Yeah, right.
Would you like a podium?
Matter of fact, we
Yeah,
had
let's
like
get a
3 of them. We had one of them too.
Yeah, we had one. Finally gave it away. So I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in New York. And he was telling me about this Amish family went to New York. Never been to New York. Decided we got to go to New York and see the Empire State Building. So a man and his family, his wife, walk into the Empire State Building. And they're kind of wandering around the lobby. And he and his older son wandered over to this door that had all these lights. And this elderly woman in a wheelchair was sitting in front. The door is open, and the woman wheeled in, and then the doors closed, and the lights went back and forth, and the doors opened, and a beautiful blonde walked out. And the man said to his son, "Quick, go get your mother." I don't know if that's true or not, but I heard that. Well, welcome to the Love Your Life workshop. And I think one thing, what the story that you just told, Glenn, reminds me that one aspect of loving ourselves is giving ourselves grace. And I don't believe that God saves us and gives us grace so we beat ourselves up every day. And that's not to say that we don't sometimes need to beat ourselves up, you know. Once in a while I need to be hard on myself, you know. But I don't believe that God gives us grace and mercy and compassion because we need it. There's no other way to live without grace. I think that's the message of the cross, is not, I'm going to die for you, and then from here on out I want you to do it on your own, which would be good on your own. You know, I don't think that's, I think I'm going to die for you because the point of being human is you cannot do it without grace. And so the point of grace, I think, is to live in forgiveness and in compassion, even for ourselves. It's part of being the person you love, the Love Your Life workshop. And the other part, the other side of it is not to use that as an avenue to be something less than what we want to be, what we're called to be, however you want to put it. And so as I daily wake up and accept God's grace and His compassion, because I can't earn it and I can't be perfect, and I'm a human being, I'm part of the human race. At the same time, God inspires me to take a look at myself and say, who is the person I most want to be? You know, and you know, I most want to be this. I think that's what this passage that we just read inspires us to say, yeah, I want to live in this world with this armor that God has provided on. That's who I want to be. So that's another way of saying it. Be the person you most want to be, is that this inspires me to be like this. And I think that's in a way what Paul is saying. He gets you up to this point. He goes, now, finally, live like this. And keep this perspective, you know what I mean? So it's on one hand saying, you know, be compassionate and grace and full of grace with where you are right now at this moment in your life. Forgive yourself for not being perfect today. Forgive yourself for not having put together the perfect life, whatever that is, you know. And then at the same time be inspired to be the person that you want to be, you know, that you were created to be. So with that in mind, what I want to talk about for a few minutes is the practice of getting lost. Practice of getting lost. And at first that may sound kind of weird because in our lives and in our faith, we kind of emphasize getting found, you know. I was lost and now I'm found. I was blind and now I see. And Jesus told the story of the lost coin, and it got found. They had a party. The sheep got lost and it was found, and they had a party. The son got lost. He left and he came back. He was found and they had a party. You know, so there is something about getting found, you know, but it's getting lost. That there's another side of it, there's another element to this lostness that I think is important. And that is good to stay connected with. Another element of getting lost. When the people of Israel had left Israel, one thing that God said to them, he said, now the stranger who lives among you, he said, accept them as if they were born. In other words, as if they were one of you. He says, and love them as yourself, because you were once a stranger. So as they moved on as God's people, he said, keep this thing in mind, that one time you were lost. You didn't have your own place. Your life, your future seemed uncertain. And now when people around you are like that, you identify with them. You remember. And in a sense, they were still kind of lost people. So there's an element of when we get lost, and I'll kind of describe what I mean by that. I obviously don't mean estranged from God, but I just mean kind of in our lives. There's an element that when we're lost, we're a little bit lost, we become a little insecure. You know, where am I? I don't. Everything's not familiar, so it's a little bit of insecurity. That's not a bad thing. When we're lost, there's a change. There can be a change in our priorities. You know, we can panic, but after a while, if we're when we get lost, suddenly certain things aren't so important anymore. Other things become important, and so that's kind of interesting. Sorry about that. When we're lost, also one thing that can happen is our senses get heightened. And instead of living with dulled senses, we live with heightened senses. We tend to see a little bit more clearly. We see new things maybe we hadn't seen. We feel the temperature a little bit differently. We feel what's going on. We're more in tune in some ways, even if we might be in damage control mode or whatever. You know, things are going bad, but it's still a sense of lostness. So those are some things that can happen that are positive things that when we become lost, that we might have some insecurity, we might have some panic, change our priorities a little bit. Some things that were important seem not as important, you know, and that can ebb and flow. But then our senses become very acute, you know, and that's a good thing. Sometimes being lost is when we are wounded, when we're hurt. And I like a quote from Rumi. The poet Rumi said, "The wound is where the light gets in." And what's his name?
Leonard Cohen.
Leonard Cohen has that great song about there's a crack in everything, and that's where the light gets in. What a great song. So, being lost, in a sense, being a stranger, is, in a way, is becoming insecure, as I said. Having a little bit of insecurity in life. But I want you to think about this as we kind of develop this for a few minutes, is that faith is not so necessary in a secure life. That if I am secure in everything, is my faith really needed? You know, so it's a matter of kind of keeping a perspective about life and about who we are. That my faith is not so necessary in a secure life. So as I think about lostness, and I look at that God seemed to do his best work with people who could get lost, in a sense. He called Abraham and Sarah to get lost. You know, get lost. I mean, they were in his father's land in Ur. And it was evidently his father was a tremendously wealthy person. Abraham was too. And what did he say? I want you to go to a land. So it seemed like he spent the rest of his life just kind of wandering. And I take that for granted because I can read the story in an hour or two, right? this is a whole lifetime. Can you imagine the years where Abraham's like, and Sarah, like, are we ever going to like get to this place where we're going? And through that time, there were times when Abraham lied about who Sarah was to try to save his skin, her skin, you know. There was times when Sarah got impatient, so Abraham has a child through his servant. Then there's times when Sarah got tired of the servant and her kid and said, kick him out. All these things going on, not necessarily the signs of perfect people, but God chose them, and they were willing to get lost. They were willing to move and be strangers in this world and insecure. And God can work with insecure people. Because once again, if we're secure, how much faith do we need? Same way the children of Israel. They had a sense of security, but it was as slaves, you know. I read a lot of Rumi this week, but Rumi says, why when God's world is so big do you fall asleep in prison of all places? You know, and it's kind of a little bit different than the people of Israel. But he's kind of saying we have this world to go out in, but we kind of are secure in a little place sometimes, and in that security it becomes more or less a prison because we become dulled. And now the children of Israel, they were in bondage, they were being mistreated, they were strangers in this land. And so where did God take them? Into the desert. And we can say, well, they're going to the promised land. And once again, we can sit and we can read that story and we can see the end. For them, it was a day-to-day movement into where are we going? And if you know the story, you know they complained about that. Right. And there were times when they said, take us back to Egypt. Right. Take us back. We'd rather be secure. You know? But God does his best work when we're insecure, when we're lost. Moses, once again, you know, Moses, the leader of Israel, and we talked about him a lot. He goes out in the wilderness for 40 years. He's lost. Lost his purpose, lost his people. That's when God could use him best. So he was the perfect one to lead them in this lostness in the desert. David, he anoints David as a kid. Anoints him as he's going to be the next king. And what happens? For the next however many years, he's pursued by the king. He's being chased. You know, he spent time out just in the desert, out time watching as a shepherd, you know, the loneliness of just being out there. But then being pursued by the current king. I can imagine him saying, well, I thought I was anointed. Why isn't God just taking care of this? You know, he's kind of lost. Insecurity. Change in priorities. A heightened sense of faith. Elijah was God's prophet, and Jezebel wanted him dead. You know, God's queen, the queen of God's people, and we wanted him dead. So he ends up hiding. He ends up running off. Jeremiah ends up running out into, you know, and thinking, no, but there's nobody else. It's only me. And it was when he was lost that God came to him and found him. And once again, Jesus, you know, for some reason he's baptized, and immediately it says the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness for 40 days to be tested. You know, in a sense, lost. So I just, you know, I think that there's that sense in which, in little ways we can practice it, because there's all kinds of ways in which we're going to be lost in this world without trying. It's going to come on us, and we've all experienced it. You know, and by lost, and I mean, you know, it could be as simple as, you know, you're driving down the road, you get a flat tire, and you're busy, and suddenly your whole day changes. And that can be, you know, I know for a woman that can be a lot more difficult of an experience, just a scarier experience. But you know, we have interruptions in our day that suddenly it throws everything off. Or as what happened to Sam, finding out his father passed away, or dealing with your mother, you know, and dealing with problems at work that you weren't expecting to be there. Suddenly, everything's different. You know, things look different. Circumstances in our lives change like that. They could be little, they could be big. And that's in a sense, we can get lost on the way to doing what was a normal day. It just becomes a very different day. You can get lost on the way to having a conversation with someone. It takes a turn. It becomes different than what we planned, than what we're used to. Lost in a relationship with someone. I got lost on the way to having a marriage, and it looks different. It's not what you were expecting. You find yourself in a strange land. We even get lost sometimes on the road to faith, on to finding God. We get lost, But just remember that God does his best work with the lost, with people who are lost and not so secure in this life that they can't discover faith. Sometimes sometimes I think it's good to just, in little ways, to change things up, whatever that means for you, and change is not necessarily bad, but we're kind of conditioned, some of us anyway, are conditioned that if it looks different, it's bad, I go in, I like my steak well done, I go in a restaurant, they bring it rare. It's bad. That can't be good. Then you eat and you find, wow, it's pretty good. You know what I mean? But suddenly you're aware of it. I read a story about these guys, and I forget the name of the chair, but this is a little while back. These guys developed furniture, things like office furniture. And they set out to make the perfect office chair that was just perfect for your body and everything. And so it looked really weird. It didn't have padding on it. It was like mesh. It almost looked like metal, but mesh. And the back, instead of the back being wide and going to narrow, it was narrow to wide. And it almost looked like some sort of insect. It was just weird looking, So then they took this out to business people all over the country and they tested it out. And almost everyone said, oh yeah, it's comfortable, but it's so weird looking. Bring it back when you're finished. And almost across the board was a negative response to this thing. In the end, I'm kind of giving a real short story. In the end, they decided not to change it and to go with it. And in time, it became a their best seller of all their furniture, and then started to be copied. The basic part of what they did started to be copied by everyone. And so what they discovered is that sometimes when we see something that's different, we say, ew, but really it's a good thing. For all these people, all these businessmen and everything, they looked at this chair and they thought, ew, this is crazy. But it was a great chair. It fit. And it's amazing how many things that we go through in our life that we say ooh about. And sometimes, I'm not making light of it, but sometimes there's good reason because it's difficult. But we find that there's things that happen in that situation that just fit our lives or bring our lives to a different place, a better place. And that's part of the mystery of God working for good in all things. That faith that he works good in all things. I think about, I probably told this story, but my dad living in New Mexico, and often wondered, why did you move to Delaware of all places, Here's this guy, grew up in southwest Texas in New Mexico, and goes off to World War II, comes back, is a school teacher in New Mexico, becomes a minister in New Mexico, and could have spent his life right there. He's one of 14 kids. My mom's family was there, and he moves them to Delaware, of all places, where we spent our lives basically in Delaware. And my parents live in Annapolis now, and my mom has a brother. She's the only one left of her family. And he's visiting this weekend. And I was telling Georgia, I've probably seen that uncle fewer than this many times in my life that I recall, because we were so far from family. But I think that there was something in just this. I think there was something in my dad and mom and their faith that said we have to move out of the secure. We have to get lost. We have to lose our way a little bit. And so it was interesting to see that, and then to go back and talk to my dad a few years ago, why did you do that, and to hear some answers. But I see all through his life, they kept moving into kind of new things for my parents, which were very new things. I think it was part of that, always pushing. I went by the old church building where we all were recently, and I was just kind of looking and remembering about this building being built in 1964, and then it expanded, and then they started a daycare, and then a school, then they built a foster home, and various people like my parents lived there and had foster kids, and all these things happened, and none of it was done. It was all done by faith because we weren't sure where it was going to go, but it was all done with the sense of we need to do something. We need to be more involved in the community and displaying God's love. And it was all an adventure. And I remember back at that time with all the people who were there, kind of a heightened sense of awareness, because we weren't sure where this was all going. We weren't sure how we were going to pay for it all, but it was exciting. And that's kind of this idea of getting lost, is moving out into unfamiliar territory. And practicing doing that on our own, because there's going to be times, as we all know, that come at us when we're going to have to live through it. But we've already had this practice. This is unfamiliar territory. And yet that's where we're called to live. And even in this most unfamiliar territory that I'm in now, which may be difficult, may be excruciating, may be painful, and yet to stay with that, as the passage we read today, to stand. And to know that even in this, even though I may not see it now, I may not see it 2 years from now, I may not see it 5 years from now totally, but that in all this, that's where God works, and He's bringing good things into my life and into my spirit, even as I go through this, because He works with those who are lost in this way. So, once again, as we go through a week and little things, big things, to me sometimes it's a challenge of even ordering something different to eat. It's a reminder that, hey, you know what? Don't get too comfortable in this life, I generally go back to what I normally order, but, to order something a little bit different, or find a little bit different way of doing things, just to awaken us. It's just a practice. But I just want to end with that. I love that passage in Leviticus. The stranger that lives among you should be to you as one who was born among you, and love him as yourself, for you once were strangers. And so it's every day as we pray to identify with those who are hurting because we've hurt, to identify with those who need compassion because we've had compassion, we need compassion. It's identifying, and I think God will bless that. All right, so practice getting lost. Not too lost, but lost. All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for being our Father, and thank you for being our security. Thank you for being our light, and Father, help us not to become so secure and so lackadaisical in this life that we don't need our faith. And so keep us aware of who we are as your children, and open our eyes and our minds and our hearts to what's in front of us each day. We just thank you for your compassion, your love, and your forgiveness. In Jesus' name, amen. All right.
Where was that thing Leviticus what?
I didn't write it. It's on my computer. It's, if you Google it on the computer, it's,